Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to continue discussing short stories, on how to write short stories. And so far we've talked about what they are, what genres they work well with, why you should write short stories, both from a craft and a business perspective. And then we talked about the actual doing of the writing of short stories. Like I said, I'm a big fan of discovery writing, and so I'm kind of just going with the flow and not plotting things out too far, if at all, really. Some people like to go into it with a very vague idea of how they want the story to go, and then others go in it with like really nothing but a title or maybe a character name and just kind of let it run. And so now we're going to kind of continue a discussion on like what to do with your short story now that you've written it. You've kind of come to the end at the bottom of your manuscript, and so then now what? And so there's a few things to consider. One is editing. And just like with writing, there's the two broad dichotomy, really it's a spectrum, but dichotomy of plotting versus pantsing. You plan out your story before you write it versus you just sit down and just kind of go and see what happens. I think also with revising, it's in that same realm. Some people revise a lot, and some people don't revise at all. Again, if you listen to Dean Wesley Smith, from his standpoint, when you type the end, you're done. You just finish it and you never ever look at it again. And I was in that camp for a little while, mainly because I really hate revising, and I don't know too many writers who like revising and editing and that sort of thing. But a little more recently with some of my Nadia the Witch Warrior stories, I notice I'm going back to them a little more, and I don't feel like, at least, I am coming at it from critical voice. I feel like I'm just sort of reading it again with fresh eyes, like a reader would, and now I'm noticing all the little imperfections and things. So how I like to do revising is, well, as I'm doing discovery writing, I'm kind of also revising as I go, because we use that cycle method. Is you write a little bit, maybe 500, 600 words, and then you go back and you reread what you wrote, and you kind of make changes as you go, and then you just kind of keep writing another 500 or 600 words, and you go back and you go back. And so there's a cycling method. So, and I've noticed that when I write, I tend to cycle through the beginning quite a bit, because I am a pantser, so I'm going into the short story with really very little to go on. I don't really necessarily know where the story is going. Like the story that I have in mind, another Nadia story, is I have kind of a beginning, but I really don't know where that story is going to go. Again, like I said, when I start writing, I like to have a character in a setting with a problem. And so I have a character in a setting with a problem, and so I need to start writing it. And what I've noticed is as I go on and I get a better idea of what the story is about, I tend to have to go back to the beginning a lot to add things, maybe take some stuff out. I need to make edits, so now the beginning actually matches the story that I'm writing. Sometimes I need to set up that something happened in the third paragraph, so that way it makes sense, when 1,000 words later, because otherwise this would just seem to come out of nowhere, that sort of thing. And so when I hit the bottom and I say the end, I've already kind of done a lot of revision throughout the writing as I've gone, because that's a part of the discovery writing process. So then it comes down to the question of, like, do I do it again? This is where the Dean Wesley Smith school would say, no, you don't touch it, you're done, leave it alone. It's not perfect, but no story will ever be perfect. And your critical mind will jump in and want to try and make it perfect. And in the process, what we'll do is take out all of your particular author voice, all the little idiosyncrasies of a novel, or a story in this case, that makes it yours as opposed to somebody else's. And the Dean Wesley Smith camp is that you would just naturally, your critical voice would go in there and it would want to make all the spelling correct, which is actually probably a good thing, but all the grammar correct, and you'll have to have 5 sentences per paragraph, and each paragraph needs to be about the same length, and all this other stuff. You can't have sentence fragments or run-ons or any of this other stuff that you learn in English school Really, you don't have to do in fiction writing. If you do it well, it really works great. If you do it poorly, then it doesn't work so great. And there's the rub is that you don't always know if you're doing it well or not. And in the Dean Wesley Smith camp is well, you just don't bother guessing. You just send it out into the world, and your readers will tell you if it works or not. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think this is where I disagree with Dean Wesley Smith is he's been doing this since I was in elementary school. So his cycling, hitting the end, and setting it out is at a way different level than mine because I'm still trying to find my voice. I'm still trying to figure out how to break the rules and make it work and that sort of thing. This is why it's good to have like a good first reader and a good editor kind of look this stuff over. But with short stories, you're probably not going to want to hire an editor. They're very expensive, and a single short story may never make enough money to pay for that one editor. That's the reason why we talked about the business of short stories is you have to do a lot of this stuff on your own. You have to do your own editing, your own book covers, and that sort of stuff. So in my mind, what I like to do is write it like I normally write it. Just kind of go with the flow, see what happens, do my cycling, my constantly going back and through the manuscript as I'm writing it. And then when I hit the end, it's not the end, it's just I put away for a week or more or something like that. And then I'm going to go back to it and I'm going to reread it again. By that point, I'll have sort of forgotten it and I'll have a little bit of distance from the story. And that's when I start to notice things that really don't work for me in some cases. I also like to think that I'm constantly learning and reading, and as I'm going through this, I'm even just after a couple of weeks, I feel like I'm a little bit better of an author than I was when I wrote that story, and so that's kind of my approach. Some people go through heavy revisions. I don't know. In my mind, once you spend too many hours on a single short story, then you're kind of putting a lot of your eggs in that one basket. Again, the beauty of short fiction is that it's short. It's not supposed to take you a lot of time to write. It won't take your readers a lot of time to read. And the notion that you're going to go in there and play with this one sentence, for an hour until it's just perfect, that may not work. What you may end up doing is, one, taking out your own voice to where now that sentence just sounds like something anyone else would have written because you've taken out anything that really has you in it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then the other part is that you do hit that law of diminishing returns where spending an hour on that one sentence is that really going to improve that story that much? Probably not. If you spent that hour writing the next story, well then one, you're going to get more practice. You're going to get to be a better writer. And then you'll be an hour into writing the next story, which you can then sell and publish and do something else with that. So to me, there does have to be a balancing act between the Dean Wesley Smith camp of you just press, save and never ever look at it again, versus the other camp of you just spend, a lot of time. I've known some people have spent as much time working on a single short story as they have, as some people have working on novels. And to me, it's like that's getting a little crazy town. Most of the great short story writers that, the pulp fiction writers, they didn't spend that much time writing these stories, and they couldn't revise much because they were writing on typewriters. They didn't have a word processor. We have the benefit of copy and pasting and changing things and moving things around and saving multiple versions in case we don't like the changes that we made or whatever. They didn't. What they wrote came out from their fingertips, from the ink on a typewriter and onto a page, page of paper, and that's it. And apparently the old magazines, they would accept like up to 10 changes per page. And so if you sent them with all this red ink and said, I meant to move this over here and I want to change this over there, they'd just mail it back to you to say, we're not going to bother reading it. If you make it work for them to read your story, they're not going to. And on the flip side, you couldn't, I mean, you could just completely retype that whole page, but again, that's time that you could be writing another story to send off to someplace else. So I think the word processors have created this sort of beast that it made it too easy to revise, and so now people don't ever feel like there's a bottom to it, and so you have to create that bottom. And I think that may depend on everybody is a little different. Like me, I started off in the Dean Wesley Smith camp, and I think I'm kind of moving out of that end of the spectrum into, no, I want a little more revision. I want to revisit my stuff a little bit more. My hope is someday I will feel so solid in my own voice and style that I don't really feel like I need to do that stuff. But who knows when that'll happen, if ever. I don't know. Does Stephen King feel that way yet? Maybe. I don't know. So then the next thing of what to do with your short story. So let's say you've written the whole thing, now you're done revising, you've typed the end. The end means the end this time. You have a story. Basically, now you have a product that you want to sell. My recommendation is, and this is what I'm trying to do as well, is send that story out to as many different places as you can. I am a big believer in indie publishing your novels because the traditional publishing business is just toxic, and I've never even really been in it, but just from what I hear from other people who are trying to get an agent, they're trying to get a deal, and they're getting, measly advances and all this other stuff like that I'm like, I don't see the point anymore. And, unless you just, one, have that ego that you want to say you've been published by Simon and Schuster or whatever, or you want to win some sort of literary prize, because usually you have to be traditionally published to even be considered for those. Really, otherwise, for business purposes, I still think in the long run you're better off self-publishing all of your novels. But short stories, there is a wonderful growing market, again thanks to the internet, of little magazines and anthologies that people are cropping up all over the place. I've even thought about maybe starting one of my own. More on that later. We'll see. And so they are constantly looking for content. Then there's all the blogs and there's all this other stuff, the websites and things like that. They are constantly looking for places to publish. Or they're constantly looking for content to publish in their publications, and so that creates a great place for you to put your stuff out there. I think it's especially really good if you're a beginning writer, like I am. I consider myself a beginning writer. It is a great place for you to maybe find new readers. When I published my story in Sexy Fantastic, A Babe in the Woods, I got this really nice email from a guy in Australia who had read the story and really liked it and wanted to know if there was going to be more coming down the ways. I probably never would have reached him if my story had not been in Sexy Fantastic, and that story would not have appeared in Sexy Fantastic if I had not submitted it to them. Here's the rub. You have to get very used to rejection, because what you want to do, or what I want to do at least, is write a lot of stories and then just constantly send them out into the world. And you're going to get a lot of rejections. You're going to get a lot of, thank you for submitting, but it's not a good fit for our magazine. You'll also get some where it's just you never hear from them again. You send it off and they don't even bother to tell you no. They just kind of ghost on you a little bit. So you have to be okay with rejection. I want to point out, I had sent 2 other stories over the months to Sexy Fantastic, and they all got rejected. Again, I didn't even hear back. So when I sent A Babe in the Woods, I really had low expectations, but it got published, and there you go. Now people are reading it and picking it up and that sort of thing. And so for me, that's how I think of short stories. Is one, it's just a really fun thing to write. I love reading them, and so I discovered I really like writing them as well. But from a business perspective, it's really a great way to just sort of maybe find new readers and let new readers find you. And so that's what I think. Now, at a certain point, you have to, as my grandpa used to do it, just fish or cut bait. what are you going to do? How many rejections can you get for this one story before you just kind of give up, so to speak? Again, this is where the internet comes in. You can now self-publish short stories too. You can self-publish them individually, or you can put them in a collection. I have a lot of short stories out on Amazon individually. A lot of my Yark, the Scholar stories are out there. And so then what I want to do is like put them in a collection and try and sell them that way. And so it becomes, like I said, just another revenue stream. It becomes another way for people to find your stuff. And so that's what I would suggest doing once you're done with your short story, is now just try and sell it. And I don't even really care what sort of short story you wrote. There's a market for it out there somewhere. Some are a little harder to find than others. I have a few short stories I've written about my kind of experience as a counselor. It's very, very loosely autobiographical. To be honest, I'm having trouble finding a market for those because I'm not even really sure what genre it is. So I don't know like how to sell it. So I'm just kind of sending it out to places, getting a lot of rejections, and what I may do eventually is just put all those short stories in a collection and just kind of sell it that way. But no matter whatever you're writing, there's something out there for somebody. I found recently that there are magazines, periodicals for westerns, which is a genre that I don't think a lot of people read or write. Certainly not in the traditionally market, but yeah, there's still a readership out there. People still want to read those, and people are still writing them and having fun with it. And so, yeah, whatever it is you write. Of course, with romance, there's plenty of stuff out there. But anyway, yeah, tell me what you think. Have you written any short stories? Are you starting to write any? What's your notion on this revision spectrum, we'll call it? Do you revise at all, or maybe do you feel like you kind of overdo the revision, that sort of thing? And what are some of your plans for some of these short stories that you're writing, if you have written or going to write? But anyway, I will talk to you later. Bye.